A woman sits in a crowd of 70,000 people. The year is AD 57. The city is Rome. The place is the Circus Maximus, the largest entertainment venue in the ancient world. A long oval carved between two hills, loud enough to be heard from 3 miles away on a still morning. She is watching the races. Everyone is watching the races. The dust rises in clouds. The crowd screams. She screams with them, and for a moment, she does not think about anything except the thunder of hooves and the blur of colored tunics. She has been a follower of Jesus for 8 months. She does not know it yet, cannot know it yet, but somewhere south of Rome, on the long stone road called the Appian Way, a woman named Phoebe is walking toward the city. She carries a rolled scroll under her arm, tucked close against her body. She has carried it for days. The scroll is not heavy in weight, but it is heavy in what it contains. We will find out what is written on that scroll, but not yet. For now, watch the woman in the crowd. Watch how she leans forward when the person next to her leans forward. Watch how the roar of 70,000 voices pulls something out of her she did not know she had. Watch how she is being shaped, not by a teacher, not by a sermon, not by a choice she made consciously, but by the sheer grinding repetition of being here, week after week, surrounded by this. 2,000 years later, a neuroscientist named Donald Hebb will describe what is happening to her brain in a single sentence. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time she is in this crowd, feeling what the crowd feels, her brain is laying down another groove, another pathway, another default route that her thoughts will follow without her permission. She is being conformed. She does not have that word yet. But a man named Paul, sitting in a rented room in Corinth, dictating to a scribe named Tertius, writing the most consequential letter of his life, has already written it down, and Phoebe is bringing it to her. This is not a message about positive thinking. This is not a verse you cross-stitch and hang on a kitchen wall. This is not a self-help framework dressed in biblical language. This is a survival manual written for people living inside an empire that was quietly, methodically, daily, rewriting the software of their souls. The text is Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. 23 words, the most countercultural sentence Paul ever wrote, and most people have never heard what it is actually saying. To understand why Paul wrote Romans 12, verse 2, you need to understand who Paul was before he wrote it. He was not a man who had always lived at a safe distance from the world's formation machine. He was not a hermit, untouched by cultural pressure. He was the opposite. He was a man who had been shaped deliberately and thoroughly by two of the most powerful formation systems in human history. The first was the school of Gamaliel. Paul was born in Tarsus, a Greco-Roman city in what is now southern Turkey, to a family of the tribe of Benjamin, one of the most prestigious lineages in all of Judaism. His parents named him Saul. They sent him to Jerusalem as a young man to study under Gamaliel the elder, the most respected rabbi of his generation. Gamaliel's school was not just education. It was total formation. You memorized the Torah. You memorized the oral traditions. You learned to think in a specific structure, argue in a specific rhythm, prize specific virtues, despise specific things. By the time Saul of Tarsus finished his training, he did not just know what to believe, he knew who he was. The pattern, pressed in from childhood, from synagogue, from every conversation and every meal, was complete. And then the second formation system began. Paul was also a Roman citizen. This was rare for a Jew in the first century. Roman citizenship came with privileges, legal protections, status, the right to appeal directly to Caesar. But it also came with a world. You lived inside Roman culture. You walked Roman streets. You absorbed Roman rhetoric in the marketplace. You breathed Roman values without choosing them. Power earned through achievement. Identity secured through rank. Virtue defined as strength over weakness. The Roman world did not ask you to agree with its values. It simply surrounded you with them until they felt like air. Two formation systems, both complete, both thorough, both demolished. On a road to Damascus at noon, a light brighter than the sun knocked Saul of Tarsus off his feet. A voice said his name, and everything he thought he was, the careful, layered, fully formed self, came apart. He was blind for 3 days. He did not eat. He did not drink. He was a man whose entire mind was being taken down to the studs and rebuilt from the foundation up. When Paul writes, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind," he is not writing theory. He is writing autobiography. He knows what it feels like to have your mind shaped by something outside yourself. He has felt it from both directions. And he knows what it feels like when the spirit begins the long, disorienting, irreversible work of undoing it. Here's what most people miss about that verse. Paul is not warning you about something that might happen. He is describing something that is already happening right now to you. The forming is not a future threat. It is a present reality. And the only question that matters is, formed by what? You have to meet Priscilla and Aquila. Their story begins not with theology, but with displacement. The year is AD 49. The Emperor Claudius issues an edict. All Jews are to be expelled from Rome. The Roman historian Suetonius records that the Jewish community had been causing disturbances connected to someone he calls Chrestus, almost certainly a reference to Christ and to the arguments tearing through Roman synagogues about whether Jesus was the Messiah. Whatever triggered the order, the result is the same. Pack up, get out, leave the city that has been your home. Priscilla and Aquila lose everything a city means: their neighborhood, their customers, their trade relationships, the streets they know by feel at night. They are tent makers, skilled craftspeople who built their lives by hand. And now they are starting over in a foreign city with what they could carry. They land in Corinth. They open a workshop. And one day, a man named Paul walks through the door. He is also a tent maker. He stays with them. He works beside them. He brings them fully into the faith. Or perhaps they were already believers. The text leaves room for both readings. What is not in question is this: Priscilla and Aquila become two of the most trusted people Paul has in the world. He names them first among his greetings at the close of Romans. He says they risked their lives for him. He calls them co-workers in Christ. And then, when Claudius dies and the expulsion order lifts, they go back to Rome, back to the city that threw them out, back to the same streets, the same empire, the same Circus Maximus, the same grinding pressure of a culture that had always been there. They go back and they plant a church in their house, and they wait for a letter they know is on its way. When Phoebe arrives with that scroll, Priscilla and Aquila are in the room. And when she reads, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world," they do not need to be told what that pattern looks like. They have seen it in Claudius's face. They have felt it in the road under their feet the day they walked out of the city. They already know the cost of not conforming. They had already paid it. And this is where it gets remarkable, because the pattern of this world, Paul names in Romans 12, it was not vague. It was not some distant spiritual threat the Roman church had to imagine. It had a schedule. The historian Josephus, writing in the same era, describes the Roman games with the eye of a man who understands what they are doing to a population. The Circus Maximus was not merely a place where things happen. It was a place where values were transmitted at scale. Week after week, 250,000 citizens sat in the same space and absorbed the same curriculum. Power is glory. Domination is virtue. Weakness deserves what it gets. The crowd decides your worth. Tacitus, the Roman historian, is blunter. Writing about Nero's Rome, the exact Rome that received Paul's letter, he describes a city where public life had become a performance of excess, where moral decay had seeped from the emperor downward through every layer of society, and where the entertainment culture served as both mirror and engine of the values it reflected. You were what Rome watched, and Rome watched everything. This was not something the church in Rome chose. They were simply alive, simply living in the city, walking the same streets, breathing the same air, attending the same events everyone attended, because to not attend was to be strange, suspicious, dangerous. Eusebius, writing of the early church, notes that Christians were considered socially disruptive precisely because they refused to participate in civic religious rituals and public spectacles. Nonconformity in Rome was not just unusual, it was a form of treason. This is the world Phoebe walked into with that scroll. This is the world Paul was writing to. And this total formation environment, this empire built to shape the soul, is what he names with a single Greek word: schema, pattern, mold. The world is a mold. It has always been a mold, and it is pressing every day, whether you feel it or not, whether you chose it or not, pressing you into the shape it was designed to make. Paul says, stop letting it. So far, we have met the man who wrote this verse, formed twice, broken once. We have met the couple who received it, people who already knew what nonconformity costs. And we have seen the machine Paul was writing against, Rome, with its 250,000 seats and its daily curriculum of power and cruelty. Two words sit at the center of this verse: conformed, transformed. One is happening to you right now, whether you are choosing it or not. The other is what Paul is calling you toward. If that matters to you, subscribe and stay with me, because we are about to go somewhere most teachers never take this verse. Paul chose his Greek words with the precision of a surgeon. He was trained in both Hebrew and Greek traditions. He thought in both languages. He dictated to Tertius in spoken Greek, but every word choice was deliberate. And in Romans 12, verse 2, there are 4 Greek words that carry more weight than any English translation can fully hold. The first is the word translated "be conformed." The Greek is Syschematizesthe. It comes from schema, which means outward form, fashion, mold. But what makes this word so precise is its grammatical structure. Paul does not write it as a simple warning. He writes it in the present passive imperative, which means in Greek, that this is a command to stop an action that is already in progress. He is not saying, be careful, or one day the world might shape you. He is saying, stop. Stop what is already happening. Stop allowing yourself to be pressed continuously from outside into a shape you did not choose. The passive voice matters here. The shaping is being done to you. You are not the one driving it. The world is. Plato used this word. Aristotle used it. For Greek speakers, schema meant the visible surface of a thing, the form that emerges when something is pressed into a mold by external force. Paul is borrowing a concept from classical philosophy and turning it into a warning aimed at the heart. The world has a mold. It has always had a mold, and it is pressing that mold against your soul every single day. In what you scroll through, in what you laugh at, in what you stop noticing because you have seen it so many times, it no longer disturbs you. Here's what most people miss about this. A pagan philosopher named Plutarch, who lived and wrote in the very same era Paul was writing his letters, actually agreed with the diagnosis. In his essay on the control of anger, Plutarch argued that the mind could be retrained by repeated philosophical practice. He believed habits created grooves, that the soul was shapeable, that a disciplined person could redirect those grooves through sustained effort. Same diagnosis, Paul would have nodded. But here is exactly where Paul leaves every philosopher who ever lived standing in the dust. Plutarch's cure is human willpower. Train yourself. Practice virtue. Discipline your thoughts through reason alone. The source of renewal in Plutarch's world is you, your effort, your consistency, your philosophical resolve. Paul's source is something else entirely, but it gets stranger because the second Greek word in Romans 12, verse 2, the word translated be transformed, is not a word for gradual self-improvement. It is not the kind of word you use when you are describing someone who developed better habits over 6 months. It is a word for something far more radical, far more violent, far more glorious than that. The word is metamorphoo. You know part of it already. Metamorphosis, the caterpillar that disappears entirely inside a shell and emerges as something with wings. Not improved, not restored, fundamentally changed in what it is. The original creature is gone. Something new has come out of the same body. That is the imagery. Now pay attention to this. Paul is not the only person in the New Testament who uses metamorphoo. The word appears 4 times across the Gospels and letters. 4. And 2 of those 4 appearances occur in one scene, a single, specific moment on a mountain in Galilee. Matthew chapter 17, verse 2. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Transfigured. That word is metamorphoo. Peter was standing there when it happened. James was standing there. John was standing there. All 3 of them watched the glory of God, the same fire that settled on Sinai, the same brightness that filled the temple. They watched it break through the human face of Jesus and blaze outward until the disciples fell on their faces in the grass and could not move. That is the word Paul reaches for. When he writes to a church of tent makers and freed slaves and expelled refugees gathering in borrowed rooms under the shadow of Nero, when he writes, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, he is not saying, clean up your thinking. He is not saying, try harder. He is not saying, make a list of better habits and check it every morning. He is borrowing the exact word for what Peter watched happen to Jesus on that mountain. He is saying the same glory that broke through on that hillside is available to you. Not someday, not only after death. Now, here, in your mind, in the way you perceive, judge, and understand what is real. This is not self-help. This is transfiguration. The third Greek word is the one Paul uses for renewing. It is anakinosis, 2 parts, ana, meaning again or upward, and kainos, meaning new. But kainos is not the ordinary Greek word for new. Greek actually has 2 separate words for new. The first is neos, new in time, like an object that just arrived yesterday. The second is kainos, new in quality, new in kind, something that did not exist in this form before. Kainos is the word used for the new heaven and the new earth in Revelation. It is the word used for the new covenant. It is the word Jesus uses at the Last Supper when he says, "A new commandment I give you." Not a recently issued commandment, a different kind of commandment altogether. Paul uses it here. For your mind,
he is not saying your mind needs to be repaired. He is not saying it needs to be restored to some earlier, better version of itself, as though there were a golden age of your thinking you could return to if you just tried hard enough. He is saying, what God intends for your mind is the same category of event as the new creation. Something genuinely kainos, something that has not existed before. And then there is one final Greek word, and it is the most practical of all 4, dokimazein, translated prove or test and approve. It is the metallurgist's word, the assayer's word, the craftsman who holds raw metal over fire to test whether it is pure or counterfeit, who will not be fooled by something that merely looks like gold. Paul places dokimazein at the very end of Romans 12, verse 2 as the promised result of a renewed mind. You will be able to test and approve what God's will is. Think carefully about what this means. Paul is not saying, read your Bible more and then guess at God's will. He is saying, the ability to discern, to recognize what is true, what is right, which path to take when everything is dark, is not primarily an information problem. It is a mind problem. A mind that has been pressed into the world's schema cannot read God's map. It is using the wrong instrument. The groves run in the wrong direction. The defaults lead somewhere else. The renewed mind, the Metamorphoo mind, the kainos mind, can discern what the formed mind cannot. You cannot navigate the will of God on a map drawn by the empire.
If you have never heard the word metamorphoo before this video, you have been sitting on a treasure the whole time. The transfiguration word, the glory of God word, applied to your mind. Hit subscribe. Share this with someone whose mind is in a battle right now, because we all know someone like that. And stay, because we are about to come back to the woman we left in the Circus Maximus. Phoebe has arrived in Rome, and it is time to find out what happened when she finally walked through the door. The scroll arrives on a Tuesday, or perhaps a Thursday. We do not know the exact day. We do not know the hour. What we know is this. At some point in AD 57 or 58, a woman named Phoebe walked into a house church in Rome, possibly the house of Priscilla and Aquila, possibly another home named in the greetings at the close of the letter. And she unrolled a scroll and began to read it aloud. This was how letters worked in the ancient world. Most people did not read privately. They listened. The letter was a performance as much as a document, and the reader was its first voice. Tertius had written the words in Corinth. Paul had dictated them. But the first human voice to speak Romans 12, verse 2 to a living congregation was almost certainly a woman's voice, Phoebe's voice. The room would have been small, a dozen people, perhaps 24. They would have been sitting on low benches or on the floor, leaning close because the oil lamps did not throw much light. They were people who knew each other's names and debts and fears. They were people who had gathered at personal risk in a city that was watching everything. And in that room, we cannot prove it, but the geography of the story makes it entirely possible, was the woman from the Circus Maximus, the woman we met at the beginning of this video, the one who had been going to the games for 8 months and could not explain why she kept going back, the one whose hands clapped when the crowd clapped, whose voice rose when the crowd rose, who had been sitting inside one of the most powerful formation machines in human history and did not yet have a word for what it was doing to her. She hears Phoebe read. She hears, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world." And something in her chest recognizes itself, because Paul has just named the things she could not name: schema, pattern, mold, the pressing, the crowd pulling her forward before her mind caught up, the feeling she carried home from the Circus Maximus. Not quite right, not quite herself, unable to say exactly why. She has a word for it now. She has been conformed, and she did not choose it. It happened to her the way water-shaped stone, slowly, repeatedly, without asking permission. Here's the part nobody tells you. In 1949, a Canadian neuroscientist named Donald Hebb published a paper that would reshape how we understand the human brain. His central insight can be reduced to 7 words: neurons that fire together, wire together. Every thought you repeat creates a pathway in your brain. Every pattern of attention, every repeated stimulus, every habitual emotional response, every daily input physically changes the structure of the tissue between your ears. The brain is not a fixed thing. It is a living organ that reshapes itself around what you give it. Feed it fear, and the fear pathways widen. Feed it contempt, and contempt becomes the default response. Feed it spectacle and noise and the constant drip of a crowd's opinion. And over weeks and months and years, the brain rewires itself to need those things, to reach for them automatically, to feel wrong without them. Paul wrote Romans 12, verse 2, roughly 2,000 years before Donald Hebb was born. He did not have the language of neuroscience. He had something older. He had the language of the Spirit who made the brain in the first place and has always known exactly what it does. Do not be conformed. Stop the rewiring that is already in progress. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Begin a different rewiring, a kainos rewiring, one that moves in the opposite direction, not toward the shape the world is pressing, but toward the glory Paul saw blazing through a man's face on the Damascus Road and spent the rest of his life trying to put into words. Augustine of Hippo understood this at a level most of us will spend a lifetime trying to reach. He was 31 years old when his mind finally broke open. Before that, for 15 years, he had been a brilliant man in the grip of a brilliant formation system, Roman rhetoric, Manichaean philosophy, his own appetites, which he describes in his confessions with a frankness that still startles readers 17 centuries later. He writes about his mind the way a soldier writes about a war. He fought inside himself and lost repeatedly for a decade and a half. And then, in a garden in Milan, reading a letter from Paul, something changed. He writes, "Our heart is restless until it rests in thee." He does not write, "I fix myself." He does not write, "I discipline my mind through philosophical practice the way Plutarch prescribed." He writes, "It rested." Passive, not an achievement, not a project completed, a surrender. This is the verb structure of Romans 12, verse 2, that most people walk right past. Be transformed. Not transform yourself. Not Undertake a personal transformation initiative. Be transformed passive. Let it be done to you. Offer your mind, your nous, your full faculty of perception and judgment and will to the only source strong enough to actually remake it. The same spirit that moved over the deep at the beginning of everything. The same glory that broke through a human face on a mountain in Galilee. The same power that took Saul of Tarsus, fully formed, completely certain, violently wrong, and rebuilt him down to the foundations. This is not something you do. This is something you allow, and allow again, every day, for the rest of your life. There's one more thing. The verb tense Paul uses for be transformed is present continuous, not past, not a single completed event. Ongoing, now, and now, and now. Paul is not describing a conversion moment that happened once and settled everything permanently. He is describing a daily posture, a daily act of resistance against the schema, a daily act of surrender to the Metamorphoo. The woman who heard Phoebe read that letter in Rome, she did not walk out of that house and never struggle again. None of them did. Priscilla and Aquila still walked the same streets, still passed the same Circus Maximus, still lived in a city that had thrown them out once and was entirely capable of doing far worse. But now they had a word for the pressing. Now they knew that what was happening to their minds was not neutral, not simply the weather of being alive in Rome in the first century. It was a battle. And they had been given not just a warning, but a strategy, not Plutarch's strategy, which amounts to trying harder with the same broken instrument. Paul's strategy, which begins with the most countercultural act available to a human being in any century, under any emperor, surrounded by any crowd. Stop, recognize the mold, and offer your mind to the only one who can make it kainos. The renewing of the mind is not a one-time decision. It is a daily war. It is also a daily worship. And it is available to you right now. Not because you have achieved sufficient spiritual discipline. Not because you have finally managed to feel holy enough. Not because you have your life together, enough for God to begin. But because the same glory that blazed through a human face on a mountain in Galilee is still moving, still pressing inward, still doing in willing minds what Paul promised it would do. Transform, transfigure, make kainos every day, starting today. 3 things to carry with you. The first, the world is a formation machine. It has always been a formation machine. In Rome, the machine had a name, the Circus Maximus, the gladiatorial spectacle, the daily theater of power and cruelty. Today, the machine has different names, different screens, different algorithms that are extraordinarily good at learning what pulls you forward before your mind catches up. Paul wrote Romans 12, verse 2 from inside the original empire. He wrote it for you in this empire right now. The schema is real. The pressing is constant. And naming it, simply seeing it for what it is the first act of resistance. The second, the inputs you choose today are physically rewiring your brain. This is not metaphor. This is biology. Donald Hebb and the neuroscientists who followed him have confirmed what Proverbs stated 3,000 years ago. As a man thinks in his heart, so he is. What you feed your nous, your mind, your full faculty of perception and judgment and will matters more than you have been told. Not because God is keeping score, because the brain is listening. Every day, it is taking what you give it and building pathways you will travel automatically tomorrow. You are not a passive observer of your own mind. You are its daily architect. Choose the inputs accordingly. And the third, the Greek word Paul uses for be transformed in Romans 12. Verse 2 is Metamorphoo, the same word Matthew and Mark use for what happened to Jesus on the mountain, when Peter fell on his face in the grass, when James covered his eyes, when the glory of God broke through a human face and blazed outward until 3 grown men could not stand upright. That word, for your mind, not for the minds of the spiritually advanced, the theologically trained, the people who have it together, for the church of tent makers and freed slaves and expelled refugees gathering in borrowed rooms in the most dangerous city on earth, daring to believe that the Spirit of the living God could remake them from the inside out. For you, that is what Paul is offering in 23 words. Not a technique, not a discipline program, a transfiguration. The glory of God moving inward, making something kainos, where something conformed used to be, every day, starting today. Which of these 3 Greek words hit you hardest? Syschematizesthe, Metamorphoo, or anakainosis? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. The woman walked home from the house church that night through the same streets she had always walked. The same torches burned on the same corners. The same city roared somewhere behind her in the dark. But she knew something she had not known that morning. The pressing was real. The mold was real. The schema was real. And it had been working on her for 8 months without her consent or awareness. And the glory that could undo all of it was more real than any of it. She did not go back to the Circus Maximus the following week, not because someone told her not to, because she finally had a word for what it was doing to her, and a better word for what she wanted instead. Metamorphoo, transform, transfigure, be made kainos.